What a beautiful song. It's a nigun. It's called a nigun MTM from Eitan Katz. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? Let's light up the darkness. Lots to cover today. I'm going to keep it moving. Who's with us today as we get it going? Stephen in New Hampshire, Yehud in South Carolina, Paul in Chicago, James in Indianapolis, Melissa in Great Neck, Renee in India, wishing everybody a Zizin Pesach, a sweet Passover. Rochelle in Modesto, twice in one day. If you miss it this morning, we finished the very last bit of Tractate Pesach, and we made a siyum so that we could break the fast of the firstborn, which was observed today, but is excused if you make a siyum and a celebration. Heather wishing us sunshine. Dana saying Baruch Hashem. Bill, sorry I missed you this morning. I'm not a morning person. Come on, Bill, you got to get up and make a l'chaim early in the morning now and then. I'm just kidding. Lucy in Minnesota, PK in Colorado, Jill in Willamette, Heather in Corona Del Mar, Sharon in Lebanon, Allison in North Carolina, Nancy in North Carolina, Betzalel, big hugs from Miami, Fresia in Deer Park, Washington, Sue Strauss in the house from Chicago. Lucy had a conflict. Don't worry about it. It's on the page if you want to see what we learned. I taught a little bit about that last bit. It was pretty interesting stuff. Michael Stein in Vineland. Sharon was talking about giving an answer, a question that came up this morning about redemption of the firstborn. I also posted an article about it on that earlier show. Yosef said, I liked it when the room was dark too. Went nice with the wisdom candle. I mean, it's darker than it used to be. Actually, it's a little bright, right? A little bright. Right in my face. Just move that back a little. That might help. Okay. And Shal DG watching from India. Nice to meet you, sir. Welcome, Shal. Great to have you with us. Today's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by Michael Diamond for the healing of his sister, Fredel Bas Rivka. Michael, may your sister have a complete healing, a refuah shlema. May it be speedy. May we only hear good news, and we say amen. And Michael, thank you for your generosity in sponsoring today's learning. May you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings, and we say amen. Okay, where are we holding? This is Daf Hey, page 5. Here in Tractate Shekalim. There's a much shorter tractate than Pesachim, the previous tractate that we did. The 5th volume of the Talmud, Shekalim, is all about when the temple was standing, there was this yearly tax, as it were, mandated by the Torah, where every adult Jewish male would have to contribute a half-shekel, the biblical half-shekel, and this was used to fund the communal offerings, the daily offerings that were brought every day on behalf of the Jewish people, the additional offerings of Shabbos and Yom Tov, of the festivals, the new months, etc. And then what was left over from that we'll actually be talking about, what was basically for the upkeep of the temple. Now that money is being collected for the needs of the community, it's essentially a tax. But now it brings into question all kinds of issues with respect to the responsibility. Who is doing the collecting? How is it being collected? How is that money being transported? anytime you're transporting money, think of an armored car, there's a lot of responsibility and liability that goes with it. And who exactly is responsible? The one doing the transporting, the one sending the money, the one receiving the money. We'll be getting into those issues today. First, just a little bit of a tidying up, a couple of lines left in chapter 1, and then we're going to move on to chapter 2. The Mishnah that we've been studying that ends here, chapter 1, just yesterday we were talking about the premium, right? So we have this general principle that whenever you're dealing with the Holy Temple, when it's no longer there, but while it was standing in Jerusalem, if you were buying from or selling to, which includes consecrating to, donating to the temple, anytime that you were making a transaction with the temple, if you were fulfilling an obligation, in a sense, you get the value of fulfilling your obligation when you make your contribution to the temple. And just in case the coin that you're rendering might have impurities in it, right? Maybe the king who issued that particular coin, and recall that this was collected from Jewish communities outside of the land of Israel as well. And so just in case the coin that you were giving did not have quite the amount of silver as was required in the biblical obligation of giving the half-shekel each year, you would give a premium, just a little extra, the smallest denomination coin that they had, basically an extra penny, to make sure that just in case somehow you weren't giving the absolute complete amount that you're obligated to give, that the temple would not be shortchanged. It's a nice general principle. You don't want to shortchange the temple, but it actually goes further than that. If in any way you shortchange the temple when you're making a transaction with the temple, and this would include, for example, vendors and contractors who are doing work at the temple, maintenance work, construction work, anything, whenever you're doing business with the temple, if by any chance you shortchange the temple, that is a sin, it's a transgression, and it is the misappropriation of holy property. And so to protect the people from mistakenly violating that prohibition, they would add this little premium to just make sure that you were over the top and just, you wouldn't mistakenly misappropriate temple property. So now that they were collecting from everybody, not just the half-shekel, but this tiny little bit extra, the premium, so then what did they do with the premiums? Were they also used to purchase the communal offerings that would be offered every day of the year with the additional offerings of Shabbos and festivals, or were they used for something else? We open with that question. The Gemara cites a baraisa with regard to the additional premium. To where would the premium fall, i.e., what was done with the premiums? Rabbi Meir says they would add them to the shekels themselves for the daily and additional offerings, right? The idea is you want to make sure that somehow the temple didn't get shortchanged. That's why the premiums were added. Okay, so then the premiums should be used in that fund of shekels, of half-shekels gathered from all the men around the nation that would be used for the communal offerings. But Rabbi Elazar says, no, they would be allocated to free will offerings, i.e., the money would go toward the burnt offerings that were sacrificed when the altar was idle, right? So there was additional monies that would become the equivalent of individuals bringing free will offerings, right? And we saw yesterday that not only could a Jew bring a free will offering, a non-Jew could also. If you wanted to show your love for God and you wanted to make a donation through the temple, this axis between the earth and heaven, as it were, you could do that. And the types of free will offerings that were brought were just specific kinds of offerings, like the burnt offering, also known as the elevation offering, where the animal sacrifice would be burnt in its entirety on the altar. So when the altar was idle, like they already brought the daily offering, they didn't get a lot of people coming through that day. So there were these extra funds in the temple treasury that needed to get used up. They couldn't be used for anything else. And if they weren't needed for construction or some other things like that of the temple, then they were used to make these communal free will offerings. And so Rabbi Elazar says that's the fund that these additional premiums to make sure that people didn't misappropriate temple property would go into that fund, as opposed to the standard communal offerings, the obligatory daily offerings They would rather go to the free will communal offerings. Rabbi Shimon Shazuri says they would use the premiums to buy gold plating, and this served as covering for the inner walls of the house of the Holy of Holies, meaning the most inner chamber where the Ark of the Covenant was stored, the room that was never entered by anybody except the high priest on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, as it were, when he was obligated to go in there, but with tremendous trepidation, with great fear, because when he was in that room, if he had not prepared and purified himself properly, he would die, right? And so, since nobody else could go in there, and it was possible that he would die, when the high priest would go in on Yom Kippur, they'd actually tie a rope around his ankle in case, God forbid, he should perish while he's in there. Nobody else could go in and bring him out, so they would pull him out. The exception to this rule is occasionally they had to do maintenance and construction work even inside the Holy of Holies. And so then, whereas on Yom Kippur and the rest of the year, nobody could go in there except the high priest on Yom Kippur. Now, just some guy who's a construction worker could go in that room. But he wouldn't go in through the curtain the way the high priest would go in. As we saw some months ago, they would lower him in from the ceiling, and he would be like on a swing with blinders on so that he shouldn't see what he's not supposed to see, and he would be entirely focused on the work that he needed to do while he was in there. What kind of work? According to Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, some of these extra premium money that couldn't be used for the communal offerings would instead be used for this upkeep of the Holy of Holies, which I guess it had golden walls, and so that that gold would, I guess, peel off and could become damaged or just become a little bit thicker, and they would add to it. That's according to Shimon Shazuri. Ben Azai says the money changers responsible for collecting the shekels would take them, the premiums, as their payment for their services, as they had to take time off from their regular work. And now you start to get an insight into who these money changers are, right? The money changers, recall that they're actually the ones who are collecting the tax, right? So on the first of Adar, right, the last month of the Torah year, they would announce that they're going to collect the half-shekels. On the 15th of the month, they would set out the horns of collection, so-called because they were narrow at the top and wide at the bottom so that people couldn't reach in and take money out. They would only put the money in. And sometimes they brought a coin that was too big and they needed to get change. And that's why these money, or sometimes they brought foreign money, something. So these money changers were actually esteemed members of the community who took time off from their regular work to enable people to pay their taxes. It was volunteer work. And some say that they would get paid these premiums, not something that they could count on like a salary, but a little bit of, a minimal, what's that word I'm looking for? What's that word? When they give you a little payment just for your trouble, what's that word? Somebody will put it in the comments. Somebody will put that word in the comments. When they give you honorarium, a little honorarium. There you go. And some say that the premiums were spent on transportation expenses, i.e. the cost of moving the shekels from the collection sites outside of Jerusalem into Jerusalem. Okay, that ends chapter 1, and now we moved to chapter 2. Okay, chapter 2. We begin with halacha number 1 of chapter 2. When people who live far away from Jerusalem wish to send to Jerusalem the shekels that have been levied from their community, they may combine their shekels and exchange them for darics or darkonot, or some say dinars, right? And so in other words, they're supposed to be collected as the silver half-shekel. Okay, but let's say, you're bringing them from a city in the north or a city in the east, and thousands and thousands of people have sent the shekels, and now they need to be transported. It's going to be just big, heavy money bags, very difficult to carry. Okay, so then they can exchange those silver coins for gold coins, which of course gold is so much more valuable, it will occupy less weight and it'll be easier to get it to Jerusalem. This is going to be acceptable. In other words, we can transfer the value of the half shekels of silver onto gold coins, which will be easier to carry. That's going to be permissible. The Mishnah adds, just as there were collection horns in the temple to receive the half-shekel contributions, so too there were collection horns in the rest of the country, i.e. areas outside of Jerusalem. And the local inhabitants placed their half-shekels in these horns, which were later brought to Jerusalem. With regard to the residents of a town who sent their shekels to the temple and they were stolen from the agent on the way or were lost, if the collection of the chamber... Now, before I read this part of the Mishnah, I'm just going to read to you how the halacha came out. As Rav Steinsaltz writes it out, it's just so much clearer and easier to understand. And then we'll go back and read the Mishnah and it'll become much more clear. So when the residents of a town send their shekels, and this is where the law came out after the discussions here in the Gemara. When the residents of a town send their shekels via an agent and they are stolen or lost, the halacha depends upon two factors. Whether the agent was a paid or unpaid bailee, the one transporting the tax collection from the outlying areas to Jerusalem, was he being paid for his work or was he a volunteer doing the work? That's going to change what his liability is. Makes sense. And the other factor is whether the collection of the chamber ceremony had already taken place. So that's the ceremony after all the shekels come in. And this whole tax collection is done very quickly. Announced on the 1st of Adar. They start collecting on the 15th. 10 days later, all the horns are taken away everywhere else except in Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, they're only available at the temple. So you only have 10 days to get that payment in. They rush it, right? It's not like you have, months and months to get it in. 10 days. So then on the 25th, they're only available in the temple. And then basically on the 1st of Nisan, they start taking money out in order to pay for the communal offerings that are going to be offered on behalf of the Jewish people. In fact, even on the 25th, I think they start to take some of it out because they need to buy some of these lambs that need to be examined for 4 days so that there should not be a blemish before they get offered on the altars. Now, before money gets taken out of the New Year's shekels, it's going to be a different status for all the money that's coming to the temple, whether it's reached there or not, compared to after the money starts getting taken out, as we shall see. As long as the collection of the chamber has not taken place, the agent who is bringing money from the outlying areas to Jerusalem and somehow it got lost or stolen, right? So if the collection of the chamber has not taken place yet, in the temple, the priests haven't started using the money of this year yet, as long as that has not happened, then the agent must address the claims of the residents of the city, meaning he's still the agent of the people sending the money in. And if he loses it, okay, so then he's going to have to deal with the residents. Like they can sue him, and he has to defend himself vis-a-vis the residents of the city who sent him with the money to bring it to Jerusalem. If he is an unpaid bailee, then he must swear to the residents of the town that he was not negligent, and then he is exempt like all unpaid bailees, all voluntary caretakers of property. The residents of the town must then contribute their shekels again, right? It's their responsibility. They sent an agent. They didn't pay him. He was a volunteer. Somehow the money got stolen. He has to swear that it was not lost due to his own negligence. If he was negligent, he's responsible. If it was beyond his control, okay, then it's their responsibility. They have to give the shekel again. If the agent is a paid bailee, then he is liable to pay for loss or theft. He takes an oath to exempt himself only in cases of unavoidable accident, right? It was utterly beyond his control what happened, but otherwise he has a higher degree of responsibility than the unpaid bailee. So he takes an oath to exempt himself in cases of unavoidable accident, otherwise he must bear the cost of the loss. after the collection of the chamber ceremony has taken place in the temple in Jerusalem. Then, if the money was lost on the way to Jerusalem, right? They already started taking money out of the collection chamber, even though there's still money flowing into Jerusalem from the outlying areas, but they've already started using it for the new year in the temple. In that situation, the money is considered that it doesn't anymore belong to the residents of the town that sent this guy to carry the money. Rather, all the money, even the money that's still flowing in, is considered to belong to the temple treasury. And this guy who unfortunately lost it on the way in, or it was stolen from him, and he has to make an oath that he swears it was not his own negligence. The oath that he has to take, he doesn't swear it with regard to the residents of the town who donated the money. Rather, he swears this oath with regard to the temple treasurers who are considered the owners, or the temple is considered the owner of the money. So after the collection of the chamber ceremony has taken place, the relevant oaths are addressed to the temple treasurers, and the residents of the town are exempt. Now, if the money's lost, the residents of the town no longer have to donate it again. They don't have to replace the lost money. Since the ceremony is performed with the intention of including money that has already been gathered, as well as money that will be gathered in the future, all shekels are considered from that point on to be the property of the temple. However, if the shekels were lost before the collection of the chamber, they are still considered to be in the possession of the residents of the town, even though their agent is carrying it toward Jerusalem. The agent must take an oath addressed to them, and if he is exempt, the people must contribute their shekels again in accordance with the subsequent interpretation of the Mishnah by Rabbi Abba. So hopefully I've made that clear enough. And now we'll read how this is stated in the Mishnah, which is confusing. That's why I wanted to read you the halacha first. So with regard to the residents of a town who sent their shekels to the temple and they were stolen from the agent on the way or were lost, if the collection of the chamber had already been collected before these shekels arrived, the agents must take the oath of a bailee to the treasurers of the temple. After the collection of the chamber, all the shekels have been contributed belong to the temple. If the ceremony has not been performed and the contributions have not been collected into the baskets, the shekels are considered the property of the residents of the town, and therefore the agents who lost it or had it stolen from them must take an oath to absolve themselves to the residents of the town whose money they were carrying toward Jerusalem. Since these shekels are still considered the property of the residents, because the shekels never reached the temple, those people in the town have not fulfilled their obligation. Therefore, the residents of the town must contribute other shekels in their place. If, after the residents of the town contributed other shekels, the original shekels were found, or the thieves returned them, then both these original shekels and those newly contributed ones have the status of consecrated shekels and belong to the temple. However, they do not count for the following year. The people cannot claim that since they contributed twice in 1 year due to this situation, that they are exempt from contributing the next year. In fact, they will have to contribute again the following year. That's the Mishnah. Now we go to the Gemara. It is taught in the Mishnah that residents of a town can exchange their half-shekels with gold darics, the smaller, lighter, more valuable coins, in order to ease their burden on the way to Jerusalem. And the Gemara asks, if the goal is to ease the agent's burden by combining the coins into a more valuable commodity, let them make them, i.e. exchange them, with gems, which are much more valuable than the gold darics and much lighter to carry. And the Gemara answers they do not do this due to the concern lest the price of the gems decrease, since, like all commodities, their price can decrease and the temple treasury of consecrated property will lose. So you can exchange it from heavier money into lighter, more valuable money, because money has, all money has the same sort of relative value at any given time. Money is a commodity. I mean, yes, the value of the Canadian dollar changes with respect to the American dollar, but for these purposes, money is money. You can change heavier money into lighter money, but you can't change money into gems or gold vessels or anything like that because the price of that commodity, the diamonds, the rubies, gold itself that's not minted as money might go up or down, and the temple could lose. And then the person who made that exchange would come to be guilty of the transgression of misappropriating temple property. We skip down a little. It is taught in the Mishnah that if the shekels were lost or stolen from the agent on his way to Jerusalem, he must take the oath of a Baili and he is exempted. And the Gemara comments on this. The Mishnah is referring to a case where the agent was an unpaid Baili. He's a volunteer taking charge of the money of the residents of the town to bring it to Jerusalem. However, with regard to a paid Baili, it is not addressing this sort of case, since only an unpaid Baili is exempt through his oath from payment for the loss or theft. Right? A volunteer can say, hey, I wasn't negligent. I swear, before God that I was not negligent. So then he's exempt from liability. But if he's a paid Baili, okay, he's getting paid so that he will assume responsibility, and he's going to go, he's going to go the distance to make sure that he doesn't lose it. So he can't just swear an oath that he wasn't negligent. He's still going to be liable for loss and theft. Or is he? Rabbi Abba said, even if you say that our Mishnah is referring to a paid Baili, he is still exempt through an oath, since the term stolen in the Mishnah is referring to armed robbers. Right? So a paid Baili, if he says, well, while I was asleep, a thief came in the night and took the money, so he's still going to be responsible because he was paid to not be asleep on the job. But if he was taking every reasonable precaution, but on his way to Jerusalem, armed robbers assaulted him, what's he going to do? No person could withstand that attack. He wasn't paid to bring an army with him to guard against armed robbers. So that is a situation beyond his control. And even a paid Baili can take an oath and say that's what happened. It was armed robbers, and then he would be exempt. And the term lost means like one whose ship sank in the sea. He was saved, but the money he brought with him belonging to the residents of the town was lost with the ship. Again, even though he's a paid Baili, if he was being sent by ship with the money and the ship sank and he managed to, hang on to a plank and survive, okay, he couldn't bring the money with him, but that's not going to be deemed his fault. And he just has to swear that those were the facts of what happened, and he will be deemed exempt as well. We skip down a little further. Rabbi Elazar said, the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. As Rabbi Shimon says, that consecrated items for which one is responsible are considered like his own property. If a person consecrates an item as a vow, he takes on himself the responsibility to replace it if it is lost or stolen. In other words, I say, I am setting aside $100 to give to the temple. So I take the $100 out of my wallet, I put it in the special charity box, right? And when I get a chance, I'm actually going to take it to Jerusalem and donate it to the temple. So now I'm not going to use that money. I consider it belongs to the temple. I'm just now its caretaker until I actually can deliver it to the temple. So what happens if the money in my charity box gets stolen? It's in my house. It's in my charity box. I already set it aside. Like, I'm not going to spend that money. I'm not going to use that money. The only thing I'm going to do with that money is deliver it to the temple. If it gets stolen while it's in my possession, do I now have to replace the money in the charity box? Or is it enough that I already removed it from my possession? I removed it from my spending money. And it's like, I don't have access to that money anymore. Am I responsible to replace it or not? That's the question that's being asked. So if a person consecrates an item as a vow, he takes on himself the responsibility to replace it if it is lost or stolen. Rabbi Shimon considers this responsibility to be a type of ownership, and therefore the agent who lost it must take an oath to the person who consecrated the lost item, who remains in some sense the owner. So now I put it in my charity box, I gave it to somebody else. This is the situation of the Bailey. So he has to swear that oath to me because I'm still the owner until it gets delivered to the temple, even though I don't have the right to use that money. That's what Rabbi Shimon is saying. And the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Shimon maintain that consecrated items belong to the temple, and therefore no oath is relevant, in accordance with the principle that one does not take an oath on consecrated items, right? So it's actually, when there's a consecrated item, you don't take an oath on that. That's explained why in another place. But since already once it's consecrated, even though I might be in my house, I'm its caretaker, but the owner is the temple as soon as I consecrate it. As soon as I set it aside to be a donation to the temple, it's technically owned by the temple. That's what the rabbis say who disagree with Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yochanan disagreed with Rabbi Elazar and said, the Mishnah is in accordance with all opinions. It is not limited to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon due to the fact that it is a rabbinically instituted oath not required by Torah law. So we don't swear an oath on consecrated property according to Torah law. But the rabbis instituted that you would swear an oath as a caretaker who lost consecrated property, basically to encourage these caretakers of consecrated property to, go above and beyond and make sure that they don't lose it. Since people may claim that they have no responsibility for these items, the sages instituted taking an oath on consecrated items as well. The Gemara asks, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who holds that the oath mentioned in the Mishnah is a rabbinic ordinance, it works out well that if the shekels were lost or stolen by the agent after the collection of the temple chamber was completed, the agent takes an oath to the temple treasurers. And if not, if they were stolen or lost before the collections were collected in the temple, he takes an oath to the residents of the town. And the residents of the town are then responsible to give other shekels to replace what was lost or stolen on the road to Jerusalem. Although by Torah law, one does not take an oath on consecrated items belonging to the temple treasury, and therefore there's no need to take an oath to the temple treasurers by Torah law, this oath is required due to the fact that it is a rabbinically instituted oath. However, according to the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, there's a difficulty. It is reasonable that when the shekels are lost, before the collection chamber ceremony, the agents must take an oath to the residents of the town, as this is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. As long as the collection of the chamber has not taken place, the residents of the town are held responsible for their shekels, since they are considered to be, the shekels are their property, right? The owners of the town still have ownership of the property, even though they're consecrated, even though they've actually donated it into the horn, but it hasn't reached the temple yet. But why does the agent take an oath to the temple treasurers if the shekels are lost after the ceremony? With regard to the treasurers, what is their purpose in this discussion? One does not take an oath on consecrated items. And the Gemara answers, the Mishnah means that the agents take an oath to the residents of the town in the presence of the temple treasurers, so that the treasurers will not suspect the residents of the town of not having given their shekels. Alternatively, even if the town residents are considered to be honest people who would not be suspected of withholding their shekels, the agents must take an oath in the presence of the temple treasurers, so that the treasurers will not regard the residents to be negligent people who fail to properly watch over their shekels. So what we're seeing is a system of checks and balances, basically an honor system, but with an honor system that, everyone has to show how honorable they're being in front of multiple parties, so that the money gets there and no one is subject to temptation to misappropriate, neither, through intentionality or bad intention, neither through negligence. Okay, that completes Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 2. Now Mishnah number 2. With regard to one who gives his shekel to his fellow to contribute on his behalf by placing it in the collection horn for him, and the fellow instead contributed it for himself, right? So I give my half shekel to John, and John, because he's going to go over there where the shekels are being collected. I just can't get over that day. So I give my half shekel to him. He's going over there anyway to deposit his own half shekel. And maybe he forgets, right? Maybe he forgets that he's that the half shekel in his pocket is the one that I gave him, and he just drops it in as his own half shekel. So now what is his liability? And the fellow instead contributed it for himself. So if at the time that he placed the shekel in the collection horn, the collection of the chamber had already been collected in Jerusalem in the temple, well then this fellow is guilty of misuse of consecrated property. That he has to bring a sin offering if he did it unintentionally. When they perform the collection of the chamber, the treasurers also have in mind the shekels that have been contributed but are not yet in the possession of the temple treasury, so that all those who have contributed the shekels will have a part in the communal sacrifices, right? This is actually something done on behalf of the people, that as soon as they start taking the new shekels out in the temple in Jerusalem, it's considered that the whole system outside of Jerusalem, outside in the land of Israel, and even all the Jewish communities outside that are sending shekels to the temple in Jerusalem, once they start taking shekels out in the temple, that whole system, and even the shekels that haven't entered the system yet, but that will, all of them are considered to be temple property, right? Once they start taking them out, it's all temple property. So if somebody makes a mistake like this guy, then he would have misappropriated temple property as opposed to his fellow's property. With regard to one who mistakenly contributes his shekel from consecrated money, and then the collection, right? So if I already consecrated some money to give it to the temple, and then I thought, oh, okay, well, now I'm going to make a donation. Now I owe a half shekel. I'll just take it from my consecrated money and throw my half shekel into the collection horn. I can't do that. The money that I put in the tzedakah box to send to the temple later, unless I specifically set it aside to be my half shekel, that money is already the temple's property. I can't take my half shekel from that to give to the temple, because it's like I took money from the temple to give to the temple. Not allowed. So one who mistakenly contributes a shekel from consecrated money, and then the collection of the chamber was collected, and an animal was purchased with those funds and was sacrificed as a communal offering. So then this person is guilty of misuse of consecrated property once the animal has been offered. This is because at that point, the money used to purchase the animal is transferred to non-sacred status. However, before that point, merely contributing consecrated money is not considered misuse. If one mistakenly contributed his shekel from money used to redeem the fruits of the second tithe, right? So when we tithe, when we're a farmer and we're tithing produce at the time the temple is standing, first 2% to a priest, next 10% to a Levite, next 10% in 4 out of the 7 years of the sabbatical cycle of the land, I set that aside as a second tithe for money that I'm going to use to go up to Jerusalem and, and observe the festivals in Jerusalem, the pilgrimage festivals. And so I'll have what to eat and enjoy while I am there. I can either use the produce from my farm and take it with me and eat it in Jerusalem, or I can sell that produce, call it second tithe money, but I can only use that second tithe money to go up to Jerusalem and spend it there during a festival pilgrimage. So if one mistakenly contributed his half shekel from money that he received when he redeemed the second tithe produce, or from money from the permitted sale of produce grown during the sabbatical year, he must eat non-sacred fruits besides the one he already possesses, corresponding to the value of the shekel, and he must treat them with the sanctity of the second tithe of the sabbatical year fruits. In other words, I have to make a restitution. Now we get into the Gemara. The Mishnah taught that if one gave his shekel to an agent in to place into the collection horns, and the agent placed it in there for himself. If the collection of the chamber ceremony has already taken place, then the agent has misused consecrated property. And the Gemara comments, this is difficult. If one steals his fellow's burnt offering and slaughtered it without specifying for whom he was offering it, isn't the unspecified offering considered to be in the name of the original owners? And doesn't it also atone for them, right? So you got this weird situation where somebody set aside an animal that he was going to take to Jerusalem and offer on the altar as an elevation offering, right? The sort of most giving type of offering. And then somebody else stole that animal that had already been set aside for that purpose. He took it to Jerusalem, and he didn't tell the priests that it was for himself. He just said, here, please give this as an elevation offering. Then really all he did is act as a transportation agent for the one who originally set aside the animal. He got it to Jerusalem. It was offered as a burnt offering. And so it's going to make an atonement. It's going to accrue to the credit of the one who originally set aside the animal. Well, then the same principle should apply here. Since the treasurer performs the ceremony of the collection chamber without having anyone particular in mind, so this shekel, right, which somebody set aside to be his half shekel, gave it to his friend, said, please put it in the horn for me. And then the guy went over there and sort of put it in for himself. Well, the truth is he didn't put it in for himself. He put in his friend's half shekel. Eventually it reached Jerusalem. And sort of, in the heavenly accounting, in heaven, they're going to know who originally put that shekel aside. It was the guy, and his buddy who then sort of did it for himself. In fact, all he really did is transport that half shekel to the collection, to the horn where it was collected, and he didn't put in his own half shekel. In heaven, they know what really happened. So why is he guilty? The one who accepted the responsibility to, place his friend's half shekel in the horn, and then he didn't. He just put it in for himself. The truth is, all he did is he transported that half shekel, and the only thing he's really guilty of is not contributing the half shekel that he owes this year. He hasn't fulfilled his obligation to contribute the half shekel, but is he really guilty of misuse of consecrated property? That's the question that is being asked right now. Rabbi Yudan said, it should be explained as referring to a case where this shekel was a particular coin that stood out among the other coins in the collection basket, and the temple treasurer noticed it and removed this coin in the name of the agent, right? So it's like somehow when this guy took his friend's half shekel and went to deposit it in the horn in the temple, the one who was sitting there, administering the receiving of the half shekels on behalf of the temple, noticed that it was a particularly shiny coin. He said, this particularly shiny coin was donated by this guy right in front of me, John. And now John gets the credit for donating the half shekel rather than Tom, who sent John over to donate his half shekel. This is what Rabbi Yudan is saying. And in fact, there were coins that were sort of like specially minted coins, highly shiny or specially imbued, and somehow they were set apart. Maybe they were held together with a ribbon, I don't know, but they were particular coins, and this practice was done by the members of the house of Rabban Gamliel. When one brought a half shekel from the house of Rabban Gamliel to the temple, he would intentionally push it into the basket in such a way that the treasurer would notice it and place it among the collected half shekels. And so even though all these half shekels were coming in essentially, anonymously, people just have to donate. Everyone is liable to give a half shekel. There are registers who are recording who's given and who hasn't. But at the time that they actually reach the temple, it's just, loads and loads of half shekels coming in. But certain people like Rabban Gamliel and his household would make sure that the temple treasurers knew Rabban Gamliel has made his donation, right? And so somebody donating on behalf of Rabban Gamliel's house, if he somehow is taking money from somewhere else, that would be misappropriation of consecrated property, according to Rabbi Yudan. The Gemara comments why it must be the case that the person who illicitly contributed the shekel in his own name is liable for misuse of consecrated funds only if that particular coin is identifiably among those collected. Otherwise, wouldn't one be concerned and say that perhaps the half-shekel given was not used to purchase the offerings and instead fell among the remaining contributions in the chamber? And if this is the case, is there misuse of consecrated property with regard to the remaining contributions? Remember, there's going to be more half-shekels donated than are needed to purchase the daily offerings, the communal offerings. That's why there's going to be an excess that's going to be used for temple maintenance, temple upkeep. So if you're that money is going to have a little bit of a lower status than the money that's used to make sure that it's purchasing, that specific coins are purchasing the communal offerings. Should one rather explain the Mishnah in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir? As Rabbi Meir says, one is liable for misuse of consecrated property with regard to the remaining contributions of the chamber. It doesn't matter what it's used for, as long as it's being used by the temple and you use it in some way that is not kosher, you are guilty of the transgression, misuse of consecrated property, according to Rabbi Meir. Therefore, this too is reasonable only if the Mishnah is addressing a noticeable coin, like the particular coin or the house of Rabban Gamliel, which the treasurer would intentionally collect in his name. And the Gemara asks, how did the agent who placed the coin in the basket for himself benefit that he should be liable for misuse? His goal was to perform a mitzvah, and there is a principle that mitzvahs were not given to derive benefit from them. How is he benefiting? All he's doing is taking a coin from his friend and putting it in the horn. How did he benefit? And the answer is, well, they keep track of who has donated and who hasn't. So if he's now not going to be subject to the tax collectors coming after him to make sure he pays his half-shekel, sure, he benefited. Absolutely, he benefited. That is what I've got today. I'm sorry I didn't give the warning, get your comments and questions in, but I am done. This is tough stuff, so hopefully I made it clear enough and you could follow. Let me see what we have in the way of comments and questions. Elvis, comment. The intricate rules about liability between towns and taxpayers and bailees indicate to me at least two things. One, it was a relatively frequent problem that needed to be formally and systematically addressed. And two, there was a very serious effort to balance the interests of the bailee and the taxpayers. Elvis, I couldn't have put it any better. Thank you for summing it up so nicely. Perfect. Sharon, sounds like the town residents are getting treated unfairly. Through forces not in their control, they pay the tax twice with no credit being afforded towards future obligations. Why is it set up that way? And I think the answer is they don't really have a national tax collection system administered by the king. Right? This is a different idea. This is that everyone has a Torah obligation to get their half-shekels to Jerusalem. So, since not everybody's going to make the trip to Jerusalem, the members of each town are going to appoint somebody to take it to Jerusalem for them. But it's the town's responsibility to get it to Jerusalem. Now, when there were kings in ancient Israel, and I'm sure that the kings collected taxes for other kinds of purposes, like maintaining the roads, raising armies, whatever kings do. There, you would think it would be different, right? That once the king's tax collectors come to town and collect the money, okay, hey, I paid my taxes. Not my problem if the tax collector loses it on the way. And in that sense, maybe the title that I gave today's show is a little bit misleading. I said, what is the liability of a tax collector? And it's really more, what is the liability of the agent of the town who is sending all those, contributions, mandatory according to the Torah, but the system is not that the Holy Temple has set up a money collection system throughout the land. Really, the temple collects them in the temple, and that's why the ceremony of collection is so important. So what we saw is that after they start taking the money out, it is considered like that the whole system is holding money that all belongs to the temple. Nevertheless, as we've seen, there is a certain amount of the town has liability, until they start taking the money out in Jerusalem. Until then, it's the town. They chose their agent to get the money to Jerusalem. And perhaps that's why they have that responsibility and they would have to replace it. But that's only if the agent loses the money before they start collecting in Jerusalem. After that, they won't have to pay the tax, right? So it almost seems like there's an incentive to pay late, like when closer to the time of the collection. But the truth is that's why there's that 10 days of collection only, right? And after that, the guys in your town are not going to be collecting the money. It's not like you have all year to give. It's just the 10 days, and then they head off for Jerusalem. So that seems to be the way it worked. A question with regard to the siyum that we made this morning. Debbie Schweigart asked, does the firstborn son of a Cohen also need to be redeemed? And the answer is no. We don't do redemption of the first. Even today, there's redemption of the firstborn. You find the priest to give, I think, $5 silver to. But not only the sons of Kohanim don't have to be redeemed, even the sons of Levites don't have to be redeemed, because the Levites were sort of, God said, the Levites shall be my firstborn in the place of the tribe of Reuben, right? So Reuben, was not held in as high esteem as the tribe of Levi. And so all the other children of Israel need the redemption of the firstborn, but Levites and Cohens are a subset of the Levites. They don't have to go through that ritual that we do even today. We saw today in the Siyum, even though we're talking about the laws of Pesach, we finished with a quick little digression on the redemption of the firstborn. And finally, Lucy, this brings to mind the question of, when is a gift given and no longer my property? It seems that the Mishnah says, when I have set it aside to give, it is no longer mine, and I cannot use this for something else. Intriguing to think about as a general principle. And this comes up all the time with the tzedakah box, right? So we have charity boxes in our houses, right? I have one over there. Pretty soon, I'm looking forward to going back to morning minyan. But throughout this year of COVID, I pray here in the mornings, every morning. And so I put on my talis, I put on my tefillin, and I have a little stack of dollar bills, and I put them in the tzedakah box. Okay, so that money in the tzedakah box, no longer mine. I'm its caretaker, and when the box gets full, okay, then I have to find a charity to give it to. And what's interesting is, what do? What I actually do is, okay, count what's in the box. Okay, let's say $80 are in there. Then I pick a charity and I make a donation using a credit card. So then I take the money out of the charity box and put it back in my tefillin bag, right? And so now for the next 80 days, I'll have dollar bills to contribute. And I'm careful to keep that accounting straight. But, when you have money set aside for charity, you've undertaken a holy responsibility to make sure it gets there. That's certainly one of the lessons we're learning today. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Today's Thursday, so with God's help, tomorrow our regular Friday class, noon Pacific, we'll be doing Daf Vav, page 6 here in Tractate Shekalim. Then tomorrow night's Shabbos. And normally we would have our next class Saturday night, but Saturday night is Passover, so no class Saturday night. So then you'd think Sunday night, but no class Sunday night because we're live outside of Israel. So when Passover comes, the first 2 days are a full-fledged festival. And so the next class won't be until Monday night. At that point, we'll be a couple pages behind. Right now, we're one page ahead. So we'll have to do some double classes soon to get caught up after that. All the best and have a wonderful night, and look forward to see you tomorrow, Erev Shabbos at noon.